Well, welcome everyone to the Growing Money with Sean Trace podcast. I've got a really interesting guest with me today. I would just like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. So my name is Rob. I'm the Director of Family Budget Services here at Buckingham. And what I do is I help families and couples save more and argue less while keeping the lifestyle they love. What I do specifically, though, is I help people only with budgeting. So forget about retirement planning, saving for kids' college, buying a house. None of that really works unless there's money left over. And for some of our clients, and even people that aren't clients at Buckingham, I help them kind of find that extra money left over so they can reach their financial goals.
That's awesome. And I was talking to my daughter earlier, and my daughter and my wife, and we were discussing money because it was something that had happened. And we were sitting there, and I had money earlier in the day. It was a whirlwind of a day, and it just then things went. And I reached down for my pocket, and I was like, "Hang on, did that money go that I had in my pocket?" And what was kind of funny was like, then I sat there and I started tracking back through my expenses for the day. And I was like, oh, there. And it wasn't like it was that much, but it suddenly was just, it got away from me. It's like I wanted to know where that was going. And I started to have this conversation with my wife and daughter about budgets and budgeting. And it was interesting. And my daughter was, able to frame it in a different way. And she was like, well, I don't really understand a budget, but I understand that like a menu. And I was like, well, talk to me. What are you talking about there with a menu? And she's like, well, when you go to a restaurant, everything's kind of laid out for you. And you have, when we go in, we have a certain amount of money to work with, and I can see things. And I was like, okay. So we're getting some idea. And it was interesting to kind of process with her as she was looking at, having a certain amount of money that she would be able to spend in the restaurant, and then seeing what she can do with it, what needs to be, I was like, all right, so you have $10. You're not going to be able to order 4 milkshakes, you have to have a meal. You have to have, it has to be well-rounded. And she's like, oh, she was able to kind of grasp the concept there. And then as we were talking, I was playing, I use ChatGPT now to make these little fun business worksheets for her. And it was, I was like, okay, so we were looking at needs versus wants. And she was like, I need this, this, and this. And I was like, well, do you? You don't get these needs, she had like 50 wants. And she was like, I was like, well, if you didn't get all those wants, you might not be able to take care of your needs. And so I started trying to teach her the beginnings of what a budget might be. And it was just like, and it was just really interesting because she's like, there was this impulse control that was just like, but I need all this stuff. And it was a fun concept. But, as you look at what inspired you to get into family budgeting and to help people with budgets?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. And I think what you were doing with your daughter is super helpful. How old is she?
She's only 8.
8. Okay, perfect. I have an 8-year-old daughter too. So, and I have 2 older sons as well. But I think the important thing is it's about choice. A lot of times as parents, we use the word afford. We can't afford that, or what can you afford? Yeah. But I think choice is an even better word because especially when you're 8 years old and trying to figure out what you want, what you don't want, there's this kind of, when you have to make a choice, you can't have everything. You can't have 4 milkshakes. You have to kind of prioritize and see what's most important. And then from there, you have the choice. Yeah. Some people's choices are more dire than other people's choices, obviously. But I think just the fact that you're having the conversation and how you're kind of helping her think through it is going to be really great for her. So I was happy to hear that you're doing that. So how I got into this was, so I always wanted to be, well, I've had a little bit of a roundabout kind of way of getting here. So I always knew I wanted to help people with money. And for the longest time, I wanted to be an investment manager or a portfolio manager. So someone who, client gives, would give me money and then kind of design a portfolio of investments to help them get great returns with as little risk as possible. So that's what I always wanted to do. And so started off, graduated from college, moved to Chicago, worked for a mutual fund company for a little bit. Then I moved to New York and did equity trading for a little bit. And then I got my dream job of being a portfolio manager and like stock picker basically, and worked for a fantastic company, was a partner there for 10 or 11 years. But as I started having my own kids, And as I started understanding, the challenges in raising kids,
Yeah.
when we're
Yes.
young and when we're young with no kids, you can kind of choose your lifestyle to some extent, right? Even if someone's not making very much money, you can still pick where you live. You can pick what kind of car you drive. If you have a car, you can kind of choose your lifestyle, where you go to eat. But once you have kids and a family and you've got the house and maybe the car, it's harder to make those choices. And time and money shrinks. So as I was having my own kids, I'm like, this is a lot more challenging than I thought it would be. And then friends and family started asking me for help with this kind of thing. And so what I did is I left my firm after 11 years there. So this was in 2015 to start my own company. And the original goal was to help people with financial planning in an online course. So kind of like a DIY way to help people, like buy the course. It'll take you through tax planning, investment planning, estate planning, cash flow, everything. And doing it in a way that was sort of breaking down, making it super simple for people to follow, and just kind of getting people off to the right start. So I left my company, started my own business, and I spent the first 9 months building, designing, developing, and testing this. I called it the 6S? Was it Money 6S? So 6 steps, but it also is kind of like success. So I developed this Money Success course, 6 steps to create your own, reach your financial goals, basically. Tested it, got a bunch of people in it to kind of try it out. And everyone said, I'm getting great results. This is super helpful. It's really breaking it down in a meaningful way that I can actually understand finally. And at the same time, I'm thinking, well, this will be great. I'm going to help more people. I'm going to have more reach. I'll have more flexibility as an entrepreneur, and I'll hopefully, make a little bit more money as well. So all this stuff was going through my head. And when it came to launch the course, I'd gone through some trainings on how to launch an online course with email list management and all that stuff, what messaging to use. And I launched it out. And whenever you launch a course, you're supposed to have a cart close date. You got that deadline.
Yeah.
So people know this is my last chance. And as you get closer, the launch process takes about a week. And as you get closer to that cart close, you're supposed to increase the rhythm of the emails. So we're like 2 days out from closing. No one had bought the course yet, but everything was like, this is totally normal. Don't worry about it. Most people buy last minute anyway. Just keep going through the process. So 24 hours out, still no one bought. And 2 hours left, no one was still buying. I sent out that last email to say, hey, cart's closing, final chance. And when the deadline passed, 0 people had bought.
Oh my goodness.
So it was totally defeating. I spent 9 months building this, spending money, hoping to have a greater impact than ever before, reaching people where it really mattered. But it was a total flop. And I knew I didn't want to go back to doing what I was doing. And so I was thinking, well, so I circled back with about 20 people who said that they were interested, had 20 conversations. And the theme that arose from that was basically, it's all well and good that we know what to do with our money. We know how much we have to set aside now. We know what our plan should be, but we don't have the money left over to do it.
Oh, wow.
And so that really resonated with me. And at the time, I was also reading the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, where the basic gist of it is, what's the one thing you can do such that by doing it makes everything else either easier or unnecessary? So the one thing to make everything else easier or unnecessary. So when I was thinking about financial planning and helping people, I was like, budgeting. I create the world's greatest financial plan, but if they don't have that money left over at the end of the day, it can't get implemented. So I really started diving into that. And then specifically with families who had the kids, they have kind of their fixed expenses. They've got school, kids, house, car. They can't exactly downshift and kind of move. Well, most people wouldn't do that. Maybe, like everyone can make the choice, but most people won't do that. So how do we make sure that people can have that extra money left over? And then the other component, which is really important, is most couples, they're not on the same page when it comes to money. And so how do you do this in a way that brings couples closer together through the process rather than diving in? So at the end of the day, it's going to help people free up more money. It's going to hopefully, with the process, will reduce arguments and bring them closer together. And I was like, this is it. I want to help people with not only money, but also in their relationships. And it's working on budgeting is the perfect blend of that.
That's awesome. And one of the things that you pointed out there is like a couple things, like Earlier, I wish that I had have made some different moves. I'm not going to say they were better, different moves earlier in my career. I'm not, if I had that ability to go back in time, Aladdin's lamp type of a thing, I wouldn't change much because I am where I am. I have my family, and that makes me happy. But at the same time, if there had have been financial steps that I could have taken earlier, it would have been great to have an awareness. And that's again why I'm making this podcast. I'm not one of those people who is, like I've got everything together. I'm literally discovering this. And that's kind of my motivation, is because, like I said with my daughter, I'm trying to provide her with information because I feel like there's some people like myself that it wasn't there. I love my parents, but the financial education side of the family was it was absent. And money avoidance was a very common thing in our family. Like, well, let's just not look at that, and because it's painful to look at. And I think that for my parents, looking back, man, just absolute respect for them. Each of them worked multiple jobs, 3 kids. Growing up, it couldn't have been cheap, and my family got me through school, and my dad was working his butt off to make sure that we got the school paid for, and forever thankful for that. But it was still like I came out of that going, well, I just don't have this information. And now that I'm a father, it's a whole different game. It is a whole different game. I'm looking to move back to the States, and just looking at some of the crunching numbers on cost of living is, it's just like, wow, how do people do it? And in certain regions, it is really difficult to pull it off, But the other thing too that you brought up was like having this alignment between the two people. And I think about my wife and myself, and we have very different views of money. And neither right nor wrong, just very different relationships with it. And my wife is like totally like, you watch Deadpool #1, Domino, that Domino character, that's just incredibly lucky. I mean, my wife will just have opportunities just fall in her lap. And I envy that, because for me, it's just like, I'm that guy that's just trudging along. But, it's interesting because the alignment, one of the things that you put it down, and I kind of wrote this question because it resonated with me, was how does aligning spending with values and priorities like transform the family's relationships and their financial well-being? Because when you're looking in the same direction, let me give you a quick example of when things are going wrong, and it's not even with money, but my wife and I went out to the beach once, and we got into a kayak. And I said this before on the podcast, and it was kind of funny because my wife and I are both extremely opinionated, and she wanted to go that way, and I wanted to go that way. And we were just sitting there in this kayak spinning and not accomplishing anything. And it wasn't until we aligned that we were able to actually do something. But talk to me about that, aligning spending with values and priorities.
Yeah, so that's a really important part of the process, going back to making choices where whatever money we have, some people it's more limited, some people it's not as limited. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is make sure we're using it as a tool to live the best life possible. And so we're trying to align our spending with our values and priorities. Now, this is the key component, is that, typically it's not uncommon. In fact, it's extremely common that, like we talked about before, most spouses or partners are not on the same page in all things, right? We don't marry our carbon copies. It's what makes life more exciting. We take the spender or saver, which is what people traditionally call it. I like to think of it more, instead of that, I like to think of it as structured versus spontaneous. So if you have someone who's more structured, they're drawn to someone who's more spontaneous because they want to let loose a little bit. Right. And if you have someone who's spontaneous, they like it, but they might be craving a little structure. So we're kind of drawn to each other. And if you think about designing a spending plan between the two of them, rather than thinking of it as opposites, they're actually complementary traits that will help the whole family live their best life, because you'll be able to take advantage of opportunities that jump up in front of you, but you also have the guardrails around so that you're kind of doing it within being financially responsible at the same time. So I like to think of it like, first of all, framing it as complementary traits as opposed to opposites, I think goes a long way.
I love that.
The other thing in terms of values and priorities is that there's 3 components if someone has a family, if they're married and have a family. There's individuals. There's the two of you as individuals that have unique interests before you even met each other. You had your own lives, you had your own worlds, your own friends. And then there's the things that two people like doing together as a couple that keeps their relationship strong. And then there's the family unit. What do you like doing as a family, all of you together, to kind of promote your values that you want to raise your kids with, whatever those are, and kind of help them live their best life too, while teaching them some, all the things you want to teach them along the way. What happens with a lot of families is the family kind of takes over. And and the stuff that people like doing as individuals, it's just the time isn't there anymore. So that stuff kind of goes by the wayside. They're not really able to spend that much time together, just the two of them, because there's kids and logistics and everything that comes with that. And plus there's less money. And so the family part kind of overtakes how people's everyday lives live. So when we're talking about spending, when I talk to couples about this, I ask both of them, what do you like doing just by yourself or with friends? Like, don't forget about together. What about just the two of you, each of you on your own? And they usually have answers. Now, those answers, the other person probably doesn't understand what the other person, that's not at all. I'm not interested in that at all. And so because we're not interested, we tend to be like, well, that's a waste of money, or that we kind of have our own judgment, when really we should be like, that's interesting. Well, hey, I don't like doing that, but if you want to do that, let's make time for you to do that. And one example that I go to sometimes is, so my wife likes peppermint ice cream and I like chocolate ice cream. So peppermint is not for everybody, right? Do you like peppermint ice cream? Are you a peppermint ice cream fan, or your wife? Or
No, I'm a chocolate chip cookie dough person.
Okay, that's a great one too. So the idea would be like, peppermint for me is like brushing my teeth. I don't want to eat my toothpaste as dessert.
Yeah.
But chocolate,
I'm with you. My wife likes mint, and I'm just like, I can't even handle it.
Right. So it'd be like the two of you going out for ice cream, and my wife, or like my wife and I, and she orders peppermint, and I'm like, why are you wasting our money? That's like toothpaste. Like, just judging her for liking it. And then what if she turned to me and said, well, chocolate, why don't we just go to the grocery store and buy a gallon of it? It's the same price as the scoop that you just paid for. Why don't we just go home and eat that? But no, that's not the point. The point is, she likes peppermint. I don't get it, but whenever I'm looking for ice cream, I'll get her favorite flavor. I'll get mine, and I'm not holding any judgment. So what's really important to know is that what someone else values, we value something differently, but the feeling that we get from the thing that we enjoy, for me, chocolate ice cream, is the same thing she gets from peppermint ice cream. It's just manifesting itself in a way that I don't understand, but that's okay. So we need to keep our individuality and kind of look at things when they say they're going to spend money on something as like, if this is important to you, I'm on board. I want you to be able to do it because this is important to me. You understand this, but it's important to me, and let's just have what we love individually. So that's where we get. And plus, like, as you know, being married and having a daughter, it's like sometimes you just want to do something on your own. I love action movies, and now my boys are old enough where they'll come with me. But when they were younger, I would just have to go to the theater by myself. And my wife would never in a million years go to see the movies I see, but that's okay. So all that to say is that we have to think about these three components as, in terms of values, as individuals, on your own or with friends, together to keep the relationship strong and to keep the family unit strong. And then we have to kind of untangle the individual, pull out, make some room for the couple to work on it as a family. And when they do that, then they feel like a much more whole person. There's less judgment, and you can kind of then keep moving along. One other thing I'll say about that is that when we talk about budgeting, a lot of times people think about it as being rigid and restrictive. So this is kind of the second component of this. People think of it as being rigid and restrictive and giving up what you love. But I would say it's the opposite. So when I talk to couples about what they're spending money on, we talk about as individuals, as a couple, as a family. Then what we do is we say, okay, this is important to you in those three areas. We're going to pick this up, set it to the side. That's not the spending we're going to touch. I want you to have spending. Now, what's left are things that the two of you agree on that you can cut back or eliminate without feeling like you're really not able to live your best life. So most people start by word of cut, and it becomes a challenge of restriction and questioning each other and challenging each other. When you say, this important to you? Let's put this over here. This important to me? We're putting this over here. What's left? Let's start here.
Yeah. The activity I did for my daughter was kind of awesome because I taught kids for a long time. So that's kind of an anchor for me as while in Asia, I've worked in media for the past 20 years, but my side hustle, because I've been in Asia and I'm a native speaker, has always been teaching English and working with these kids. You can have a grammar lesson and it's like pulling someone's teeth. But if you throw zombies in there, now it's fun. Now, zombie survival, let's talk grammar. And the kids will eat it up, right? So for my daughter the other night, last night actually, when I was teaching wants versus needs, the worksheet that I made for her was like, all right, zombies have taken over the city and you've got to think about, you've got a small backpack. What are the things that you need to put in there? And she started sitting there and it was like, and it listed some of them. It was like a Nintendo Switch, yeah. Food, bread, selfie stick, toy sword, and different things, and it was like, we went through this list and then finally she's like, oh, first of all, I got to have the Nintendo Switch and a selfie stick. And it was just like a bunch of really silly stuff. And we went through it and I was like, okay, well, let's look at some of the problems there. It's like, well, first of all, you didn't list clothes. So are you taking on the zombie apocalypse naked? Like, I mean, we're not going to be doing that. Now you need clothes. And she's like, oh yeah, I got to have clothes. And she went through it and we listed out some things that were needs, right? But then I wanted her to understand that wants were okay. Even in a dire time, what are the things that are going to bring you, positivity? And she's like, well, I really love my Nintendo Switch. And, not get into the logistics of how you would charge it or things. It's just like, she was like, that's something that brings me joy and it helps me feel good, and after I'm having a lot of stress, that's something I would want. I was like, yes. And that's okay. That's okay for you to see where it's at, as long as you understand where it fits in the scheme of your overall needs that you got to get, covered there. And then last of all, she actually made me really proud. And I was like, what's the last thing? And she wrote the last thing because she had 10 things that she got to put on her list. And number 10 was hope. And I was like, wow, that was awesome. Profound. Yeah. Yeah. And I was just like, wow, you do need hope in that moment. And I was like, did that one right, man. But it was interesting because, there wasn't the judgment. And it was just, I think that with her, it was, again, the understanding that there is that. And what you said that really resonated with me, and something that I witnessed growing up with my own parents. Like before I was born, my parents were the skiing couple. They lived in New England and skiing was their thing. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of their group activity, how they defined themselves. And then when they had kids, they just stopped skiing. And there wasn't anything that was replacing it. And again, my brother and my sister and I took kind of over and loved my parents. Their marriage didn't make it. And I think one of the parts of that was that they never were able to figure out the finance part. And that just caused stress to pile up until things went south. And, and I think that was, as I look at financial things with path, tracks, budgeting with my wife, and I sit there and go, wow, how many couples are just dealing with stress that is affecting their marriage and everything, and it's not even to do with their relationship. It has everything to do with how they're interacting with money, So, which leads to my question: what are the big mistakes that families are making when they try to create a budget, and how can they avoid that?
Yeah, it sounds like a tough situation. I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's not at all uncommon. It's hard to know once a relationship starts to go sideways where it kind of started. Is it just not making time for each other? Is it the financial stuff and the stress gets in the way of creates other relationship issues? It's kind of hard to know where it all starts. But we do know that money fights are one of the top places and top things that create stress in marriages, and oftentimes maybe leads to their end, unfortunately. But so what I think there are really two big mistakes that people make. One is that it's all about the numbers. So it's just very cold. We got to kind of stay within these constraints without understanding that this is life we're talking about.
Right.
These are our hobbies. These are our pleasures, things we like to do. And we need to, it's okay to spend money on it. This is travel. This is, your favorite thing to do. This is, going out for coffee. That's what spending is. It's not a cold numbers calculation. Yeah. So that's number one. Number two is, and this is more on the logistical side, is people try to just jump right in to budgeting without knowing what their starting point is. So if
that's a good point.
Train for a marathon, it kind of matters if they are, if they've run a marathon in the past, if they're just coming out for a half marathon, or if they've never run for 5 minutes ever. So, and or another way to put it is, if you want to get to a certain destination, well, you kind of need to put where you're starting in order for the map to route you the proper way. Yeah. And how this works with finances is, rather than pulling numbers out of the air, you just start tracking your spending first. So one of the biggest mistakes, again, just to reiterate, is budgeting before tracking your spending. So the very first exercise I have people do is sign up for a budgeting app, get all the spending aggregated into one central location so they can look at it, and then see, okay, what's our starting point? Because again, this is lifestyle. If someone wants to spend $800 a month on food, if they think they're spending $1,000, that's doable. But if they're actually spending $1,500 or $2,000 a month, and they think they're spending $1,000, then they're in for a rude awakening, and they're never going to be able to budget. They're going to feel like a failure. So you've got to know your starting point, so you know where you can take the edge off in order to get to your goals.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Like, I was surprised in speaking with my friends, and just myself as well, that seeing a lot of people don't know how much they're actually making and how much they're actually spending. Like it is just this super out of sight, out of mind. And I like the point that you were bringing up with the marathon. Like, I just went back to, my wife and I are training Muay Thai together. We're both going and doing Thai boxing from fitness and just to unleash stress. And it's great. And when both of us got back in, I'm not as young as I used to be, but I trained martial arts a long time. I've done a lot of work, and I actually was in better shape than I thought. And, it was like, wow, I thought that it was going to be really tough, but I'm actually feeling pretty good. And, certainly there's still some aches and pains that might not have been there when I was 20, but I feel pretty good overall, but it wasn't until I was able to see where I was at that I had the clarity to kind of assess that, But granted, I'm not going to be going to try to fight in any Muay Thai fights. That's not where I'm at. But again, that's an assessment that needs to be made by knowing where you are at, And so I think that I love that analogy, because I think so often, and this is I was talking to someone about, plotting a course in life. If you go back in human history, they had the sextant, that fun looking device that they would look up at the stars. And the whole point of that was to figure out, I believe it was latitude, I think it was like how far north or south you were. And then you started to get and you started to figure out where the different things were at. And to chart a course for any person that was the navigator on a boat, the most important thing was knowing where you were. Once you know where you're at, you can know how to get to where you want to be. But like, if you don't know where you're at, we're all going to look like that John Travolta from Pulp Fiction, man, where he's just like looking wherever he's at. So it's interesting that you have to know where you're at. Now, what role does communication play in reducing financial stress and arguments within a family? And how do you guide your clients in improving that communication?
Communication is hugely important. And a lot of times couples will avoid talking about it altogether, because every time it ends up in a fight or argument or just a disagreement. So then they kind of go to their separate ways and never talk about it, or rarely talk about it, only when it's a negative thing. I mean, communication is just, it's the most important thing. So, but I think one of the root causes, kind of what you were saying before, is that people get stressed. Some people will get stressed about it, especially if they don't know where they are. Like, how much are they spending? How much are they saving? When you don't know those numbers, it creates a lot of anxiety. And so that's where knowing the numbers is very, very important. And you kind of have to say the past is the past. Okay, let's forget how we got here. We're going to go on this research project. We're going to do a research project, kind of disassociating from it a little bit if possible, and saying, okay, now what can we do going forward? Let's just look back at the last, 3, 6, 12 months, whatever, see what our patterns have been. And if we were someone else advising us on to get better, how would we change things going forward? So like, there's one of the best advice I got from a coach was, when you journal in the morning, ask yourself, if I was my own business coach, how would I tell myself to solve this problem? And because it kind of picks you up out of your current situation and puts you in a different role to look at yourself objectively. So I think that's really, really important. The other thing is that we have to get small, bite-sized, positive touch points with money together. So there's a process that I use with all of my clients at the end. The goal is to put together this weekly spending review. And when we're first starting out, we build it on a very simplistic basis, and then we build it out to a little bit more complex as we figure out more and more of the spending plan. But the most simple thing to do is, once you get everything in a budgeting app and you're tracking your spending, just once a week, if someone is the numbers person or the structured person, they can drive if they want. The other person sets a timer for 5 minutes. And when that timer goes off, no matter where you're at, you end the conversation. But in this 5-minute review, there are only 2 things to look at. One is, how much have we spent month to date? How much have we spent this week? And then once you know that number, then you kind of go through the last weeks of transactions, which are all in one spot with the budgeting app. And you kind of just make note of, just kind of like an awareness exercise of, where did our money go this week? Kind of like what you're saying at the beginning with the $10 in the pocket and all of a sudden it's gone. Like, where did it go? It's easy to forget what we're spending. So when we're looking at the transactions, we're looking for a couple of things. One, how many transactions are there? Is it a long list, or is it a short list of like big ticket things that happened during that week? Another thing would be, are there any action items? Is there something we're being charged for that we forgot to do? And then the third component is just gaining a little bit of awareness, so that if someone goes out to dinner and they spend more than they intended to, they see that, and then it will actually then drive their decisions going forward of like, hey, I remember we just saw that we spent more than we wanted to when we went out to eat. Like, let's see if we can cut that bill down by 10 to 20%. But let's go out, but let's see if we can cut back more. So just looking through the transactions gets the awareness going. It helps you figure out action steps, and it kind of helps you understand, is it death by 1,000 cuts that got us to where we are, or is it a big ticket thing that kind of blew everything up? Or maybe everything's great. But either way, the awareness and just that small, once the 5 minutes are over, you're done. So that small, positive, bite-sized touch point together really helps bring couples together in a way that doesn't have to be, a fight every time. It's more of a research exercise.
I'm going to date myself here. In the 80s, there was the G.I. Joe cartoon that would come on.
I remember it.
At the end of every episode, they have that character, and knowing's half the battle. I always love that line. And, and it's like, I think about that, because it's like, one of the most important things is just awareness of whatever it is. And I love what you're pointing out, like knowing, where are you at? Are you getting slammed by big ticket items? Are you, a death by 1,000 cuts? Because I think most people have been in both places, and one of the things too that you pointed out too, and being the person who's quite rigid and not like, there is this, life gets messy. Today I had a plan I was like, all right, I helped my wife with stuff earlier this week, and I helped her with a lot with her work stuff. So I was like, all right, today's my podcast day. I know she's traveling. My daughter and I are camping out in here tonight in my home office. We decided to do a camp out. So she's sleeping over there. We're having some fun. But my wife was like, right before she flew to the airport, what type of day did we have? Man, it was a day. flew to the airport. Before she went to the airport, woke up this morning. I need to record something. The music track that I was going to sing, it doesn't work. The client wants us to do something different. So we jumped in. I'm recording for her. I'm mixing the audio, get it done. And it took more time than we thought to kind of clean up all the vocals and everything. But it finished. It sounds good. She's getting ready to run to the airport. And I was like, I looked down at my watch. I was like, oh, it's 12 noon. Wow, that took all morning. No audio podcast happening. So I'm like, all right, well, she's heading to the airport. Give her a kiss. She gets into the elevator. And I was like, I'm settling in to edit. I'm getting ready. And then all of a sudden, I hear my mother-in-law screaming, Sean, go help, go help, go help. Because we live in one big house. It's Asia. It's different, like family dynamics. But I start running downstairs like, I don't even know what's happening. I speak Vietnamese, but like, she was screaming so fast and quick. And something I could understand. Turn off elevator, turn off elevators. I run down, flip the switch in the elevator. And I hear, hello from inside the elevator. And I was just like, are you stuck inside? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, how long till your flight? She's like, not long. And I was just like, oh man. So we call the elevator guy. I'm trying to get the elevator open, but it's jarred. Can't do the emergency switch. Long story short, nothing to do with money, but it was one of those situations where sometimes the best laid plans don't always work out the way we want. And again, it's about finding that flexibility. And, but yet when you have a good budget, this is something that I was saying, like, you can prepare for that. I had a friend who was a Navy SEAL, but my other friend was in Special Forces as well. And he told me this time that he watched these SEALs came and practiced for a job they were doing. What they did is they were on location in country, and at the airport, they laid down with tape the shape of the location they were going to go into, and they did it 1,000 times. And there was this planning and this structure so that when anything went the wrong direction, they were ready for it. But if you are just going on the fly without a plan, without a budget, you're not ready for that. You're not ready for when things go sideways,
Sure. I mean, this isn't as important as Navy SEAL work, but I think I prefer ranges rather than limits. So a lot of times people will set a limit. If we go above this, it's sort of like if someone is counting their calories, or they say, well, I'm not going to have any sugar today. And then they have an Oreo because they're so delicious. And it's like, well, might as well eat the whole entire bag. Well, how about we have a range from 0 to 3 3 Oreos a day. And if you have one, it's not the end of the world. It becomes a kind of a green light, yellow light, red light situation where it's like, if you're below the lower limit, green light, do what you got to do. If you're between the ranges, it's a yellow light, meaning just kind of slow down, be a little bit conscientious about what you're doing. And if you're at the red light, that's a stopping point. What that signals to us is that it's not an all or none kind of a thing. There's a little bit of wiggle room for the stuff life throws at us. There are going to be, things that we're not anticipating. That's a big part of budgeting. And so we have to make sure that when we're looking at the total spending of what someone is going to be putting out for the month, it has to be a range. It cannot be a fixed number, because it's doomed to fail that way.
I remember as a kid, and I think that I remember that psychology experiment that they talked about, that they put the candy in front of the kids and the delayed gratification. Yeah. I mean, and so many people are the type that they're like, when you are not thinking about your money, people are, hey, what you got there? Well, it's funny you should ask, and then a week later, you're looking at that going, that probably wasn't the smartest thing, and that's most of us hopefully have grown up out of that. But I think that a lot of people don't, and they get to that. And that's why I love when you're talking about this range, because it's like, okay, maybe I can have 1 cookie or 2 cookies, because a lot of people, say, all right, let's finish 3 bags. And they're like, whoa, slow down there. Or you get the reverse or the opposite of that, where people are just, I will never have cookies again. And it's like, well, hang on, that also is not necessarily serving you. But talk to me about this. Can you share an aha moment you've experienced with a client that shows some of the power of aligning spending with values?
I can think of a client where this was a few years ago, and they went on a family vacation. And they got back and I was meeting with them. I was like, how was your vacation? And he's like, oh, I couldn't. This was like really early on. We hadn't even done it. This was like our very first meeting. And they wanted to put it off the process until they got back from the vacation. And he said, I couldn't enjoy myself. I was like, oh, why couldn't you enjoy yourself? He said, I was just thinking that this money should be going elsewhere to better places than on this vacation. And that was hard to hear, right? Because here you go, you're spending time with your family. It's supposed to be quality time, experiences, and all that stuff. And it's like you're thinking about where else your money should be going. So by the end of the process, they actually had another vacation plan, and they came back, and we had already designed, we had put the roadmap together of where they should be spending, where they are now, and kind of create some clarity on those things and made some room in the budget for traveling. And they took another vacation as we were wrapping things up, like in the process. He's like, this is one of the best vacations I had. I knew we had the money to do it. We had a great time. We could just enjoy spending time together. And so I think that's it. I mean, it's just like when people don't have an awareness, if they're being restrictive on their fun because they think that's what they have to do, I feel like it's hard to live life that way. So not that we don't have to make sacrifices as individuals over our life or parents. Like there are sacrifices that need to be made, but there are also sacrifices that can be made, or that don't have to be made. However, I'm saying that you can do fun things and still be financially responsible at the same time. So that was a good aha moment, and I was happy to hear that that he found that clarity they needed to have fun on vacation.
Well, it's like. I think, a lot of us have been programmed that you can't have your cake and eat it. But like with this, if you plan, like there are ways to be able to enjoy life while also being financially responsible. And, things that I'm aspiring to be better at that. But people go through different phases in life. We kind of touched on that earlier. And in budgeting, priorities shift from young families to those approaching retirement. You work with people in all stages of life. How do you talk to people about really recognizing these different stages in their life?
It definitely is different, right? I mean, when I graduated college, my first job was in Chicago. I was making $25,000 a year. I mean, not much to live on. I was living in a big, expensive city. And so my budget had to be different at that time. And I had to make it work. I had to prioritize rent, gas in my car, groceries, and I didn't really do much else. I mean, I would buy tortillas with some shredded cheese and some black bean dip, and that was my dinner most nights, and maybe a couple eggs or like an egg or two. So that's but I also, again, I could pick my lifestyle. I had a small studio apartment, or I could have had a bigger place but had roommates, and I didn't really want roommates. So I said, okay, well, I'm choosing to pay a little bit more in rent because I want to have a place to myself. Small place in not a great part of town, but it's a place of my own.
Right.
Then as we get older, as we talked about, people typically excel in their career. They start making more money. And the need for budgeting, they feel like kind of goes away a little bit because like, I'm making enough, I can make these choices. Then kids come into the picture. And as you know, a whole set of expenses come into play. And then there's like home ownership and getting married. There's all these different life stages, and building a budget is different. But I would say the difference. So people usually come to me when they have a significant life event like marriage, kids, career change, maybe thinking about starting a business, because they know they need to kind of like tighten things up before they do that. The difference between as people have their family and then when people are close to retirement is, it's just darn expensive to raise kids. Like no matter where you are in the world, it's just expensive. And so money and time is limited, and we're still kind of building our careers when we start to have our kids. So we're not in like our peak earning years yet. But then as kids get older, the costs come down, our income goes up, and then the costs come back up as we approach college and their activities and sports and music lessons and everything there. But our income is also going up, hopefully at that time too. But then what happens is if people aren't paying attention to their budget, as they make more money, they just keep spending right up into it and don't really have enough saved. Yes. By the time they're 55 or something like that, they're 10 years from retirement, they're thinking, I'm nervous we're not going to make it now. What do we need to do now? So budgeting is a little bit different because once people have gotten the lifestyle that they're used to, it's hard to cut back. And so what we have to do is be even more cognizant of, okay, this is not going to be a painful process. You're going to be able to keep the things you love. You're going to be able to keep the lifestyle you love. We're going to have to sweep out the corners. We're going to have to get rid of some things. We got to clean up some debt, but we'll get there. But let's, again, start with that value, sort of like a values first type of spending plan. Pick that up off to the side, and what's left? What are you willing to sacrifice to get to the number? What's left that you're willing to change to get to the numbers that we need to get to? So it definitely is different depending on age and stage of life and whatever people have going on. But either way, it always comes back to just values and priorities, keeping what's important to you, setting that to the side, and then what's left over is what you can cut. And then we overlay the goals and figure out, okay, is this enough money or do we need to find more room to get you to where you want to get to?
Yeah. Well, it's like you see someone who's got on a fitness thing and they want to get that beach body or whatever it might be. And like, well, that's awesome. That's your goal. But where are you going to cut some of those calories so you can hit it, Because it's like, as much as it would be wonderful, you have to find a plan. Now, what advice would you give to families who are just starting their budgeting journey? Like people that are just really like, man, I feel overwhelmed. I haven't been doing this. Where should people start?
Yeah, I think it's super simple. Going back to just start tracking your spending. Just literally just start looking at it. And if you don't want to take the time, because most people don't, I work with families and I'll do the analysis for them going back a year, but don't worry about the past if you don't have the time for it. Just start tracking, when it's a new month or whatever it is, just start looking at things a week at a time. Where's your money going? What are your fixed expenses? What are your flexible expenses? And kind of just go from there. Have those short bite-sized conversations where you're both on the same page and you're looking at it. One of you sets a timer for 5 minutes, looking at your total spending month to date. Don't worry about budgeting categories. Categories are not the most important thing. It's the total number that matters. It doesn't matter if they spend on Amazon, if they go out to eat, if they bought some clothes, whatever the case may be. It's $1 spent. So don't worry about what category it's in. Just look at that total spending number. That's always the best place to start, is just with tracking spending.
That's awesome. That's one of the. I am trying, after all of my my podcast guests. I've got mine in front of me. I write it down and then I go and throw it into my tracking app. The only thing that I did create one distinction, because it was something that I find is dangerous for me. In blue was the stuff that I was spending like consciously, and in red was everything that was a recurring charge. Mm-hmm. So anytime I have something that goes through, because those are the ones I also forget about. And I'm trying to make those more conscious as well. So I love it, and trying to do what people are sharing. So sharing a little bit of my journey. I'm trying to track my expenses better.
You're doing great. I can tell you know what you're doing. You're putting forth the effort, and you care about it, and you're imparting it to your daughter too. So, in my opinion, you check all the boxes there.
Yeah, trying. Well, in your experience, I want to shift it away from, I have my list of questions I always prepare, but I want to ask you this one more personal one.
Sure.
If you could go back in time and give your own self some financial advice when you were younger, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, when I was young and single before I had kids, there was a job I had where I started making a decent income. And I was never really a big spender, but I didn't really track things. I always thought I could invest my way out of it. I was always big into investments and had some success there. Worked for a company that was really, really great at it. And I always thought, whatever, my investment returns will be enough that I can overcome anything. And I just wish I had focused more on, going back to the beginning, the most important thing is to figure out how much money I can put into this. That's the most important thing. Yeah. If I had a plan to like a more rigid, not rigid, if I had a more, what's the word I'm looking for?
Structured?
Yeah, more structured, or just a more clear spending plan and saving plan, I feel like I would be even further ahead than where I was now. Now, I don't have any regrets. I'm not one who looks back with regrets, but the advice I would say is just trying to free up, live my best life while being able to free up as much money as possible to put into my future goals. I wish I would focus on that a little bit earlier.
I love that. Well, brother, I want to thank you for coming on tonight. This has been awesome. But where can people find you? Where should people look for your services and to learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. So our website for the work that I do here at Buckingham is familybudgetservices.com. And if you go to that website, there's a information, there's a video that you can watch on the people that I help. There's also a link to set up a call with me. So if you go to familybudgetservices.com/help, that will take you to a link where anyone can schedule a 30-minute call with me for free. There's no charge. We'll talk through your biggest challenge, try to solve those problems, and if it makes sense to move forward, we'll go that way. But hopefully, we'll be able to solve a lot of those things there. So that's the best place for people to reach me.